there, piano teaching friends. Today I'm going to do a review of Keith Snell's Piano Repertoire series of books. There's a lot of books to talk about. These are all published by KJOS. And to do that, I'm going to be using my free resource, which is called Guide to Evaluating an Intermediate Piano Repertoire Series. If you don't already have this guide, please click the link in the description and download it, again, for absolutely free. I'm going to use this as I talk about these books, but there's going to be additional material on there that will be helpful to you if you're looking to find just the right series of books for your intermediate students wanting to play historical music or classical music. As a quick aside, if you have questions about what books should your students use after completing a beginner method series, this is the kind of book that I recommend, and I have a resource all about that question called Method to Masterworks. I will also link that in the description of this video. So first, I just want to say that I have a lot of respect for Keith Snell and his contributions to the piano teaching world. He has published so many books and worked on so many things that have been so helpful to piano teachers, certainly in the US and around the world. That said, this series is not my favorite, and I'm going to be sure to tell you my critiques of it, particularly more as we get towards the second half of this video. I did want to also clarify what books I'm talking about, because I have had this question multiple times from other teachers. Because he has published so many books, there's a little bit of confusion on what might be the best ones to use or which ones to use in what particular instance. So today I am primarily looking at what I believe was his original repertoire series. They are just called Piano Repertoire, and they were published in 3 books per level: Baroque and Classical, Romantic and 20th Century, and Etudes. And in order to have a complete look at all of the time periods and all the skills that your student might need at a particular level, like 2, 3, or 4, they would need to own all 3 of these books. These are the books I'm going to focus on today, again. Now, beyond that, after he published that series, he also created, I believe it came afterwards, the Essential Piano Repertoire at all of the same levels. And these contain some of the pieces that are in those other 3 books. So I'm going to put a slide up on the screen so you can kind of see what might be included. If we look first at level 3, you can see I've got the table of contents here for the Baroque and Classical level 3 book, and I have highlighted the pieces that are included in the Essential Piano Repertoire level 3. So you can see that that includes the Couperin, the Handel, all of the Bach, and then the Haydn, the complete Clementi Opus 36 No. 1, that Mozart Allegro, and the Beethoven Bagatelle. So that's actually most of the contents of that Baroque and Classical book. If we look at that next slide for the Romantic and 20th Century book, you can see that there are far fewer. And I'm going to go ahead to the Etude slide. You can see he did include a few of the Etudes. If I go back to that Romantic and 20th Century book, I think what you're going to notice is that the Essential Repertoire books do not include anything from the 20th Century selections. Let me just compare that with the same thing for level 6. That if we look at the contents for the Baroque and Classical book at level 6, again, most of them are included in the Essential Repertoire book. It is worth noting that for that Clementi Sonatina, he only includes the first movement, but for the Kuhlau, the entire sonatina is included. And now let's look at the Romantic and 20th Century. Once again, I just want to point out that while he has included some of the Romantic selections, the 19th century selections, all of the 20th century selections have been omitted from these Essential Repertoire books. So in my opinion, this is why I do not like or use the Essential Repertoire books. I actually think, I'm going to talk about this later, I actually think one of the strongest parts of this series are the 20th century piece inclusions. There's a lot of the standard Kabalevsky and Bartok and Khachaturian. Those are some of my favorite teaching pieces. So I don't use the Essential Repertoire books because those pieces are not included. Beyond the original 3-book series and the Essential Piano Repertoire series, Snell has created more repertoire books. There's a newer one called Progressive Piano Repertoire, and I have not spent a lot of time looking at these, but from what I have seen, and you can look at all of the table of contents online for free, so you can do your own digging. From what I have seen, these are, again, repackaging of the same repertoire that's in the original series, but with less pieces per book. So I could see if you had reason to only want a few selections of just using those books as opposed to using the more comprehensive series. But for my purposes of wanting a lot of repertoire at each level that's going to help a student move progressively through each level, then I would rather use the original series. And so that is what I'm going to be focusing on for the rest of the time. All right, this series goes from preparatory level, which is the pink covers, and then levels 1 through 10. And so for that reason, it is one of the biggest and most comprehensive series available that I might qualify an intermediate repertoire series. Now, truthfully, the repertoire in levels prep and 1 are more elementary, and by the time you get to level 9 and 10, you could probably qualify that rep as early advanced or certainly very late intermediate. So for that reason, there's a lot of good things going on. And I have right now on my rack selections from every level up through level 5. I don't own level 6 and up for some of the reasons that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. All right, let's go through my guide. The first series of questions on my guide is all about the physical characteristics of the book. And in general, this series does very well, very positively in my questions here. It's good paper quality. The books are durable. The print is actually quite large, so it's very, very readable, and that's one of the good things about this book. There used to be separate CD audio recordings, but I just discovered in preparing for this video that all of those recordings are available online. I will be sure to link that on KJOS website below in the description of this video. Those are all performed by Diane Heidi, and she did have some input, I believe, on this series, so that's another good selling point for this. Just a little note that I do frequently use this series, and some of my books that I own are not here because they're loaned out to students. I do frequently use this series as sight reading material for students who are farther advanced. So maybe a student who is playing something more like level 5, I might loan them a level 2 book as sight reading, 3 levels below where they currently are. Because, as I said, the print is very, very readable, it's very, very clear, and it's great material for that. So that's one of the reasons that I do own all of these books. I think they're great sight reading material for historical repertoire when you're looking for students who are more mid to upper intermediate level and you want them practicing sight reading historical repertoire. The second category of questions in my guide, it has everything to do with the repertoire selections. So the first question is, does the repertoire appeal to today's student? And I think this is one of the other big selling points with this series. The repertoire is very appealing. It's very, very standard. All of the things that you would think of, such as box selections from the notebooks for Anna Magdalena, the standard sonatinas like Clementi and Kuhlau, all of students' favorite Schumann and Bergmüller, those things are included in this series. And so that's one of the reasons that it can be very good to use with students. It's motivating repertoire, it's well-known repertoire, it's easy to use for that reason. Does the repertoire appeal to today's teacher? Well, yes and no. If you are looking for fresh repertoire or things by female composers or composers of color, then those things are not going to be included in this. And so if you're looking for standard, yes, this appeals. If you're looking for a little bit off the beaten path, it's not going to be as appealing to you as a teacher. One of my questions is, does this period favor one historical time period over another? And I would say no. It very clearly is balanced if you are using that original series. And again, as I said, if you're using that Essential Piano Repertoire series, then it's not including 20th century, and that's just something to be aware of. All right, the third set of questions is the quality and quantity of editing. And this is really where I find this series to be subpar over some of the other ones that I recommend. This series has quite a bit of heavy editing, particularly around the areas of fingering and Baroque and classical editing. And it's never clear where those editing marks are the editorial, where they've been done by Mr. Snell, or whether they are things that were actually written by the composer. And unfortunately, I don't actually like much of the Baroque editing that is in this series. My last series of questions here has to do with the pedagogical material that is provided in addition to the actual just printed pieces within the book. So, does the editor provide a suggested order of study? If there is one, it must be printed somewhere else. It's not included within the books. Now, as I said, Keith Snell has printed a lot of books, so I might be missing something that has a little bit more of guidance for the teacher. But as far as I know, there's no suggested order of study, nor are there any practice suggestions or analysis or anything of that kind. Are there technical warm-ups included? No, but it is worth noting that in this original series, there is also a separate technique book called Scale Skills. I have never used these books because I prefer to teach most technique by rote or just using a fingering chart, but that is something to know that would be part of this, as well as just keeping in mind that every level has an etudes book. So those etudes are meant to build technique, and they do tie in level-wise really, really well with the selections in the Baroque and Classical and Romantic and 20th century books. Does the book contain any historical information? There are very brief composer biographies at the end of each book, but there's nothing beyond just a real basic brief biography. I do want to say, though, that there are theory books, fundamentals of piano theory, that go along with these levels again. And not only are they really great, just very simple, clear drills of theoretical concepts such as scales and intervals and chords and basic analysis, they do have some music history elements to them, as well as a little tiny bit of sight reading. So, there is some of that included if you're using those theory books in tandem with the repertoire books. Now, I use those theory books separately from these repertoire books. They do go along with many other series, and because there are no illustrations or anything that feels childish, those theory books can work for any age of student, including teenagers and adults. So who might these books work well for if they're not my favorite? They're not my favorite primarily because of the editing and because I like a little bit more creativity in repertoire selection. I think these books are great for beginning teachers who want to study and have their students study the most standard repertoire. And if you are interested in using the middle to upper levels, I would just supplement it with perhaps urtext or high quality student editions like Alfred Masterworks of things like the Bach Inventions, and certainly by the time you get to Mozart and Beethoven sonatas, have your student buy a volume of those. I also just want to say that I really like a lot of the things in the Romantic and 20th century books. As I already said, the best Kabalevsky, Khachaturian, and Bartók pieces are in these books. So you certainly could use just the Romantic and 20th century books in addition to using perhaps good urtext or student editions of things from the Baroque and Classical eras. And I have done that. I have had students who have used the mid and upper levels of this series, the Romantic and 20th century books, for some of the selections that are included there. They are affordable books, and so they can be really usable even if you're only going to use a handful of pieces in those books. All right, I hope that helps. Please check out the link to my Guide to Evaluating Intermediate Repertoire series. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, do so, and I wish you all the best in your teaching.